Welcome to the Climate Minnesota webinar. I'm Josna Harris, Education Coordinator at Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy. And tonight I'm joined by my colleagues, Kristen Poppleton, our Director of Education, and Megan Van Lowe, our Programs Coordinator. And you'll get to hear from them in just a bit. We also have our cast down at the bottom of your screen, so if you could give a wave, everyone. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Over the last year and a half, Climate Generation has hosted 12 Climate Minnesota convenings throughout the state of Minnesota in local communities, and we're really excited to share tonight some of the elements of these conversations with you and where we hope to go from here. Before we go any further, though, we'd like to acknowledge that funding for tonight's webinar comes from the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund and the McKnight Foundation. Climate Minnesota has been built through many partnerships on the local and grassroots levels, and also with support from the state through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the Environmental Quality Board, and the Minnesota Department of Commerce. But the depth of the community engagement that we've been able to reach simply would not have been possible without the many partnerships and relationships that we've built over the past year and a half. So a big thank you to everyone involved. We'd also like to give a special shout out to the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships who worked alongside us to co-host 5 of these convenings. To share a bit personally, Climate Minnesota for me has been an incredible experience. And really it's not often that you get to take a road trip with your work team, but that's really brought our team closer together. And there have been some good memories along the way. Some of those memories include posing next to the iconic statue of Paul Bunyan and his ox in Bemidji, or driving through the farm fields of Detroit lakes at dusk with magnificent views of the skyline sort of in the background with hues of blue and purple and pink and fire red orange. And also having the most delicious burger at the Grand Browns in Rochester, Minnesota. But really, Climate Minnesota has been much more than a road trip. It's the people that have left a lasting impression on us, who welcomed us with more than just Minnesota nice, and have really shared from their hearts their values, stories, and their solutions. And really they've left us with this shared sense of pride and renewal for hope. So we're excited to share a little bit of that with you tonight. We'll be celebrating the conversations that were ignited through the convenings, and you'll hear what we've learned, ripple effects that were inspired, and stories from people who have experienced climate change in their own lives. So we've got a lot to cover, and we'll just jump right in and get started. I'm going to hand it off to Kristen Poppleton, our Director of Education, who will share a bit on what we've learned. Kristen?
Thanks, Josna. Can you hear me, Megan? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Awesome. Perfect. Well, we're really excited to be at this point in our Climate Minnesota project to be able to share with you some things related to what we've learned and directions that we want to take. But I want to start out with first why this project even exists. And why we decided to go down this road. So Minnesota, as probably many of you have been observers to or know, is in a state of change. And a lot of those changes we're going to be lucky enough to hear a little bit about them specifically in reference to Lake Superior in a little bit. But this change in temperature increase throughout our state is impacting what we call home. It's impacting our seasons, it's impacting our economy, and it's impacting our way of life. And people, we believe, really need to be able to understand that change is occurring and why it's occurring. We also, through the work that we do, think about very deliberately how we share this kind of message with people. And we firmly believe that just sharing the science straight out and only that is not effective, and it doesn't get people engaged. It doesn't get people connected. And so as we thought about this project, we knew we wanted to share that, what I just mentioned, how Minnesota is changing, what it means, but we needed to think about how to do this in a way that really engaged what is the minds, the hearts, and the hands of Minnesotans. And so in planning these convenings, we really kept these things in mind. So this project, Climate Minnesota, was really built on this urgent need that we saw to increase the knowledge of people in Minnesota about what's happening, and to help promote more behavior change, to get people engaged in changing what they're doing, because they're moved to action through the stories they hear, through the impacts that they hear about. And we did this through the sharing of stories, through media, and by getting out there into this great state that we call home, from Crookston, Minnesota, to Mankato, to Rochester, to Duluth, to Virginia. We were all over the state, and in 12 locations. So what did we do when we went to what we're calling these convenings? Well, each of these convenings were planned with a general framework, but what was exciting about this project was that each of them were very, very different, because each of you, I'm sure, have your own community story. You have your own opportunities to take action, and there's different ways that you are being hit in that heart and mind piece as well, as you think about change. So each convening started with a resource fair. That fair featured resources that were available in the community of Bemidji, the community of Crookston. Realizing that as an organization, we were not able to stay there forever. We were there to put on this convening. We wanted to make sure that people were actually connecting sustainably through other individuals. So that resource fair was there. There was always a welcome from a local public official, someone that really situated the convening in the place that we were and why it was important. We asked questions throughout the convening to keep the audience connected, and we're going to actually be able to practice this ourselves here this evening. We asked, what do you value about your community? Getting people thinking about this place they called home and why it was important. We always had a message from someone who knew what they were talking about. This evening, Dr. Jay Austin will be playing that role for our sort of mini convening. But we had Mark Seeley on the road with us. We had Paul Huttner and Paul Douglas, as well as Will Steger and John Abraham, all sharing that message. We asked people what they learned about that, the impacts, how it impacted what they valued. And then we featured 3 community members and their stories. How did those stories connect the people to the community we were in? And these were community members that probably weren't storytellers. They were just people that lived in Rochester or Mankato that had a story to tell. We asked people then, how are you ready to engage in solutions? And we offered actual tangible workshops that moved people to a place where they could actually do something instead of remaining in sort of a stasis of what do I do next? So we actually connected them with organizations in their community that could help them do something different, and you're going to hear a little bit about those in this evening's webinar. And then we had dessert, because what's an evening community event without dessert, right? And coffee, of course, because we're in Minnesota. And so this is how a convening played out. So what happened at these convenings? Well, what we have found, we did pre and post surveys, is that people left the convening positive. They were hopeful, they were energized, and they felt connected locally, not necessarily isolated in the global sense. We found that people increased their comfort level in actually talking about climate change, and even more so in talking about what they had meant at the what they had learned at the convening, and what the convening had meant to them as well. We found that 90% of the people that went to the convening said they actually took some sort of action afterwards. This is pretty remarkable. And these actions included things from reducing energy to agricultural solutions, to having conversations or getting engaged politically. We found that the convenings helped build capacity. So in each convening, the opportunity to connect with these folks in the resource fair, in the solutions workshops, made it possible for people to actually have someone to connect with after the event. And the number of new connections that were made is pretty remarkable when you look at it at a large scale. That the majority of people found that they had at least 2 or more people that they could call, text, or email. They had a third of them had met someone they could actually ask their house or business to lend a hand. So this was also really pretty exciting. So what's next? What's going to happen next with these? Well, we're hoping that we'll be able to continue doing this sort of work. Our last convening we held in Albany, Minnesota, and we were able to actually plan it with the youth, after-school youth club through Yes, Minnesota. It had a youth focus, and it was really a really fun event to do. We are hoping to actually engage larger sectors of the community. Of course, our goal was to really meet the community and have a mirror of the community there, but communities of color, low-income communities were not as much in attendance, so looking into how do we bring in a broader community. So that's some of the things we're thinking about what's next. So what I want to close with was one of our questions, as I mentioned earlier, was what do you value most about your community? And so this was when we put all the answers through all 12 convenings into a Wordle, this is what comes out. People, nature, and water are really important to Minnesotans, and then you can kind of see the swath. Now these Wordles were different in each community. That was really fun to see because when we were in more the prairie agricultural country, there were some different things that were important as compared to those that were living in the boreal forest of northeastern Minnesota. But these were fun. And so what we are hoping is to share with you, ask you all that very same question, but to do this in kind of a fun way through you, if you have access to a cell phone, texting us what your answers are. And so what you would need to do is put 37607 in the number to text, and then text Climate Gen as your message. And then you'll get a message back, and at that point you send one word that is what you value most about your community. And so I'm going to give you a minute, those of you that are out there, to see if we can get this to work. And I have to share the screen. I don't see any coming in yet. And participants or speakers, you guys can.
Can you put the addresses back up on the screen, please?
Yes. I thought I screen shared it, but did I not?
I can see you, not your presentation.
Oh, thank you. There we go. Let's see if it's coming through. Is it screen up there now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's not coming through. Well, you know what we're going to do is throughout, we'll put this in the side box here, and throughout, by the end of it, we'll hopefully have it populated. So if everyone wants to write that down, 37607 is the number that you text, and then put climate gen in this as your words, your subject. And then you'll get a response, then you'll send us the one word. So hopefully we'll get it populated by the end. And I'm going to pass it over now to Josna or Megan?
To me, Josna.
Josna. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Well, even if we can't see our collective words together at this point, I think it's really important to be able to reflect on what it is you value most about your community, because that will set the tone for the rest of the evening. So next we're going to turn it over to some of our local partners, and we'll be able to hear how they're leading their communities in deeper engagement around climate change solutions. And they'll share updates on what they've been up to since the convening, sort of what we're calling ripple effects. And so we're going to hear from Equilibrium 3 in Duluth and Region 9 Development Commission in Mankato. And they're going to share their ripple effects on momentum inspired through the convenings. So first, I'd like to introduce Equilibrium 3, a nonprofit based in Duluth, Minnesota, with a mission to inspire and lead change toward an equitable and sustainable future. We were able to connect with Equilibrium 3 in planning several key aspects for our Duluth convening last May, where they also presented a solutions workshop on Duluth energy solutions. For a full recap of the Duluth convening, you can see a recording of that convening at our climateminnesota.org/Duluth. And Equilibrium 3 is currently working with community partners, including the City of Duluth, Minnesota Power, and Comfort Systems, to advance Duluth's entry into the Georgetown University Energy Prize. And that's a national energy efficiency competition between 50 cities to see who can reduce their electric and gas consumption in 2015 and 2016 in the most meaningful, creative, and replicable ways. Duluth is currently in 7th place in this exciting competition. So congratulations, and here tonight to share the ripple effects from the Climate Minnesota Duluth convening is Brett Pence, who is a program specialist at Equilibrium 3. I'll turn it over to you, Brett.
Thanks, Josna. And thanks for the invite, not just to this webinar, but to the climate convening last year. It was a wonderful event, and we were so happy to be able to participate. So thank you. With that, I'm going to pull up my slides here. Can you see that? Okay. I'm going to assume you can see that.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So thanks so much. You know, Josna talked about ripple effects on this, and so while it's difficult to draw a direct line between, you know, an education and outreach event like the convening to direct on-the-ground projects, I'm going to focus on energy areas where Equilibrium 3 has been involved locally and has seen increased public participation and discourse, which I think is a ripple effect. So that's why I'm calling this Climate Conversations. So I think Josna actually did a better job of introducing us than I usually do. So you see our nonprofit mission statement. We are a nonprofit in Duluth, Minnesota. I think one of the things that's unique about us is we tend to focus on equity and sustainability in terms of energy and community development. And I think we're at our very best when we combine those two things together. And so I'm going to talk about these 4 things that are happening in our community, some of the things we're very directly involved in, and then the last part is more of a conversation. So Josna already mentioned the Georgetown University Energy Prize. We'll talk about Giving Comfort at Home and Solar Market Pathways, which are 2 programs that we have, which are kind of strategies to address Georgetown. And then we'll talk about the steam plant conversion, and also I didn't put up there, but WSSD. Those are 2 larger projects where there's a larger community conversation happening around that. So I think Josna did a really good job of explaining Georgetown again. But again, it is a national competition we've been involved in for just over a year now. You can see the 50 cities on the screen here that we're competing against. We're trying to reduce our electricity and our gas use in our residential and our municipal sectors in the city of Duluth. and trying innovative ways to do that. As Jocelyn also mentioned, we are currently in 7th place among 50 cities after the first 3 quarters of 2015. That should change. The reporting on that should include our 4th quarter data in about a week. So stay tuned. You can go to that website that I have posted up there, the GOOP website, www.goop.org, which is an acronym, not a pretty acronym, but an acronym for the Georgetown University Energy Prize. Some of the things that we've been encountering with the Georgetown Prize in terms of public participation is a lot of great volunteers in community events. Excuse me. One such event was a month-long energy canvas in a community, local community in Duluth called Morgan Park, and that's the top picture there. We've also done many outreach events and public presentations. We also had volunteers present at Harvest Fest, which is a large, kind of our last hurrah summer festival that we have at Bayfront Park. A lot of participation there, and then we had a lot of volunteers participate in our Giving Comfort at Home program, which I'll touch on next. Again, if you have any questions or just want to see kind of where we stand against other cities, I encourage you to look at the Georgetown website. Also, if you want to see how you can participate if you're local, or you want to see how you can reduce your energy use even if you're not local, you can look at duluthenergy.org for that kind of information. And also, it can give you information about how you get a home energy audit. And I should have mentioned that. That's one of the things we do as a nonprofit. We do home energy audits to try and get people to realize how they're using energy in their homes and how that affects the broader world around them. And we've had a lot of participation in that endeavor as well, and we've been really excited to see that. So another interesting thing that we've done is open this new program called Giving Comfort at Home. Oftentimes our programs are run through grants, and we don't have public participation may not be a big part of the grant. But what we found in terms of Georgetown is that the communities and the households in Duluth that are the most in need happen also to be the most energy intense. They use the most energy. They're the least efficient places, and they also typically have very low incomes, and so they're the least able to afford the wasted money that this wasted energy creates. In fact, energy poverty is a term. It's defined as if you're using more than 6% of your household income to pay for energy costs. We find in Duluth and St. Louis County there are folks approaching 30 and 40% of their household income going towards their energy bills in the winter months, in the high-intensity winter months. And so we wanted to create a program that could address that. At the same time, a lot of these folks fall through the social nets that can help them address these energy issues. And they don't have the time or the skills or the money or maybe the physical ability to do some really simple energy-saving actions for themselves. And finally, the other thing we found is we have another population of folks. They go through an energy audit, but they would like, one, to learn do-it-yourself skills on their own, but they'd also they had a good time at the audit, and they'd like to give back. And so this is why we developed this program. It's a volunteer program, and it's designed to mine our community for wasted energy. Instead of mining for minerals, we're trying to mine the wasted energy in our community and inject that back directly in our community in the hands of those who need it most, while connecting people together and educating them about how to save energy. So the populations that we try to address in this program are income qualified folks, elderly, a disabled population, and veterans. And as we have done our work in the community over the last 5 years, oftentimes many of these folks are all within that category. Many times there are a lot of overlap. The actions that we do, you can see in the pictures here, some of the very basic things, air sealing in an attic and hard to reach places. We'll also do LED lighting. We'll do a lighting analysis. We'll look at standby loads or kind of vampire loads that are always taken out of the house and try to address that. We'll also look at hot water and how that's used in a house. And then in terms of the cost, the idea of the program is to put it out there for very little cost to administer and no cost to the participants. And we can do that with volunteer labors and support by folks like the Duluth Area Community Foundation. This year CERTS is helping us. And we've seen some pretty amazing results. One in terms of actual numbers. You can see here the average. We did 10 houses last year, so that's where we're getting this data in our pilot program. We hope to do 25 to 40 this year. Well, our median savings was about $275 a year per household, and you can see a lot of energy. 800 kilowatt hours is close to 10%, 8 to 10% of an average household. Again, the gas is around 10%, and water as well. So this is in one day of work, 1 8-hour day, one crew of volunteers, typically between 2 to 4 volunteers and a staff member. You can get sustainable 8 to 10% reductions in gas, electricity, and water in a household and make a difference in their life. But the other interesting thing we found is that wasn't what we heard the most in terms of feedback from folks. What they said they liked the most was that they got hot water to the sink faster, that they weren't as uncomfortable sitting on the couch, it wasn't as uncomfortable sitting in that spot anymore, or they could read a book. So those are some of the real intangible things, qualitative measurements that we were really going for. Excuse me. Pardon me. So next steps, I already mentioned that we're going to be looking at 25 to 40 homes this year, and we hope to continue to expand this program. If you're interested in this program, you can see our website up there. Ways you could help. Really, we need donations to be able to provide that material support for free to folks, so that's our number one thing. If you live in Duluth and you know someone who might fit this program, if you could refer them to us, we think that would be great too. We have a lot of folks, but just having more people know about this would be great. And then if you want to volunteer, again, that would be wonderful. Again, please contact that website. So another thing that we're doing in Duluth is working with solar. So Equilibrium 3 has a grant through the Department of Energy called Solar Market Pathways. And the grant is was done to study the Duluth solar market to kind of identify barriers that exist and then figure out a way around those barriers to advance the solar resource in our community. And one of the ways we tried to do this in 2015 is through public outreach and education events. Did a number of public presentations. The poster on the left there is from one of those presentations. And then we also do free individualized solar surveys. This is a way to use open source software to really get at your particular house and figure if it's a good site, and then let you know some more details about that, and then the whole process around solar. So what are the incentives? What are the rebates? How do you go forward to look for that? Who are the installers in the area? So that has been wonderful, and in 2015, now that we have some data for that, we saw a 234% increase in solar installations over the year before in Duluth, and we're hoping to match that or go beyond that again in 2016. So wonderful public response. Picture on the left is a business, Builders Commonwealth, who went solar last year, and it's great to see those panels up. Also engaging the city and the public institutions like the city and University of Minnesota Duluth, Lake Superior College, all of those institutions, they're getting feedback from the community that they'd like to see solar considered, and I think this picture is sort of a great way to symbolize that. This is the city just put this up. This is a solar panel that's next to one of our ski trails, and it went up about 2 weeks ago. It's the first solar system the city has installed in 10 years. It penciled out all on its own. It will pay itself back in kind of a 10-year payback frame, and it is intended to be the first net zero ski trail. It's a lit ski trail in Duluth. The lights have now gone all LED, and over the course of the year, energy produced by the panels is more than the ski trail uses during the winter. So it's a wonderful way that the city is starting to re-look at solar and using it. And then the other way that solar has really been engaged at the public level is in terms of community solar gardens. Now, we don't currently have solar gardens. If you're from the Twin Cities, you guys have probably one of the big things you're talking about because you have a lot of solar gardens. We don't have that in Duluth, but we've seen a ton of interest in the public about this. And one thing that has occurred is our utility, Minnesota Power, has filed a community solar garden proposal to the PUC. There was an option for them to do it. They showed great leadership in doing it. but a lot of community members really didn't think they were able to provide feedback for that. So one thing Equilibrium 3 made a point of was trying to advise local community groups that wanted to participate how they could do that. And it was really striking at the end of the public comment period that the Public Utilities Commission puts out there. They have about a 2-month period. There were over 350 individual comments that were put forward to them. That is unheard of for such a oftentimes what's considered a wonky kind of thing where maybe 5 people commenting is a lot. So we're really excited to see where this is going to go. There'll be a hearing in May, and we just think the more people that are engaged in this process with Minnesota Power and their proposal, the more it will be a community solar program, truly reflective of the community and better for us all. And then the final thing I wanted to mention that's going on in Duluth, where we're seeing a lot of public input, is from 2 really large public projects that are going kind of in bonding. They're at the legislature right now in terms of bonding requests. One is for our steam plant in Duluth. We have a steam plant it's the picture on the left, that's 80 years old, and it's a district heat plant, uses kind of a very inefficient one-way steam system. It's fired by coal that heats our downtown, and we have an opportunity to change that because we're ripping up our downtown street. We'll be able to get at the lines that are underneath that, the steam lines, and that's a point in time. It's a once in a 40-year time where we could pull up those lines and install efficient 2-way hot water loop system. And once you get that efficiency, you could heat with gas or biomass, or even add solar sources at different points in the city. And so that's a wonderful conversation that turned from very wonky at high levels to a very public conversation that was discussed in the paper and by our mayor, and even by the governor at the state level. So we're really excited to see that. Also, WSSD, Western Lake Superior Sanitation District, has a wonderful project where they want to turn their biogas that they produce on site into heat and electricity. And so that is also going forward. If you have any questions or want more information about that, I've included websites down below, and if you're really excited about it, this is the time to contact your state representative wherever you're at and say, hey, we think this is a great deal, and support Duluth and their bonding requests. And that's all I have. We really appreciate this opportunity and have been really pleased to be as part of this conversation. We think that speaking about the climate reality we face is an important way to engage others in the energy choices that we all have to make. And so thanks so much for your time and interest and passion, and if there's a time for questions at the end, I'd be happy to address them. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Way to go in your accomplishments and really leading your community in tangible ways to increase energy efficiency through things like home energy audits. I know oftentimes it feels like we want to do something, but we don't have the resources in our hand to be able to do that. So that's really great that you're being able to lead the education and outreach on that. And then moving into bigger projects like solar and engaging in large-scale projects in Duluth. So we'll be cheering Duluth on in the competition and kind of keeping tabs as to where you're at. Next, we're going to turn it over to Region 9 Development Commission in Mankato, Minnesota, who are leading a citywide climate adaptation effort. And we were lucky to partner with Region 9 at our Mankato convening, where they presented a solutions workshop on their climate adaptation work. Region 9 Development Commission is a regional planning organization. Its mission is to promote the development of the region through intergovernmental cooperation, community and human development, and long-range planning and technical assistance. Region 9 is presently developing a climate change adaptation plan that will be used as a statewide model. The plan is being prepared primarily through a 14-person climate change adaptation team assembled by Region 9 to guide the vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning process. The task force includes state agencies, public and private partners, college instructors, emergency managers, and local elected officials. So joining us from Region 9 to share ripple effects from the Climate Minnesota Mankato convening are Jacob Thunander, Project Development Planner, and Brent Pearson, Resource Development Planner. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, thank you, Joe. And thank you, Megan, and everyone on Climate again for this opportunity. Are you getting a little feedback or static here? I'm hearing myself talk. So anyway.
But it sounds good now.
Okay. I'll give you a little bit of background on the project. As Josna said, we're conducting a vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan for the region, 231,000 people in 9 counties. And it's a vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning process that can be replicated by any local unit of government in the state of Minnesota. As she mentioned, we had a 14-person task force that guides the research and the work plan. There's 2 phases to that work plan. The first phase is information gathering, data gathering, finding out how vulnerable our region is, similar to any vulnerability assessment you'd find in a hazard mitigation plan. And then the second piece is creating some very real adaptation strategies. And the first message that we tried to get across was we're not creating a mitigation plan for climate change. We're going to put that discussion in the in the parking lot and start focusing on it's here and how do we adapt to it. Gathering information through the planning process, we've looked at several different ways to do that. One is we surveyed local units of government. We've asked our cities, how are you vulnerable? What types of impacts are you seeing? How are you adapting? We've crafted some adaptation strategies on that. And we've had some conversations, some very detailed interview conversations with our subject matter experts. So when we think of climate change, we think that it touches just about everything. And so we can't be subject matter experts on everything. And we've talked to people in the ag industry, we've talked to people, city planners, we've talked to planning and zoning folks, and got that more detailed adaptation strategies. And some of those range from our economic developers are even telling us we need to see more diversification of businesses in a flood zone, or our
I think we might have just lost Brent. Brent, do you want to enable your microphone and your camera once more? Or Jacob, did you want to fill in with what he was going to do?
And if I'm sure someone have a question.
Brent, yeah, you're coming in and out. Do you want to turn your camera on?
Oh, sure.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Should be on. Okay.
Now we can hear you.
You
Great.
see me? All right. So I'm not sure how much of that you caught, but one of the ripple effects that we received was that we hadn't considered in our adaptation planning process was engaging youthful populations. I mentioned there's 10 elementary schools, 5 middle schools, 4 university and technical colleges, and just Mankato alone in our planning process encompasses 9 counties. So as a direct result of our participation in the convening was that we learned that engaging younger populations in healthy dialogues about climate change is an essential adaptation strategy. Now, it's not as detailed as, increasing diversification of crops and fields, but it's something we hadn't considered until we participated in the convening. We learned of several approaches to help adapt to climate change, particularly what younger population schools are doing to create sustainability. We saw that at the convening. And during our solutions workshop, we walked through the process of adaptation planning step by step to kind of replicate the process with a much smaller group, and created real-world adaptation strategies that people can do on a personal level to adapt to climate change. Now, a vast majority of the participants in our solutions workshop were college students with many ideas about how we engage the public, decision makers, and stakeholders to help spread the message that climate change is happening and we need to prepare for it. And this feedback was valuable because many of today's high school and college students, we've seen the numbers from Mark Seeley, who shared them on his climate page, that over the past 15 years, the number of extreme heat events is almost an annual occurrence. So a lot of today's high school students are seeing this in action on a regular basis, where we have extreme dew points, extreme weather events. So that ripple effect was that we were essentially able to engage youthful populations as an adaptation strategy, and it really challenged our thinking about how we engage when crafting adaptation strategies. We don't need to just look at the technical thing. Consequently, engaging younger audiences also opened our eyes to new ways to deliver content about planning processes, and we were actually fortunate up at that convening to connect to Aaron Backman, a podcaster at Digi Radio in Mankato, to conduct a discussion about climate change, what it means to our region, and how we were planning to adapt to it. So I mentioned we went through the planning process and created practical strategies and action items to help shape our planning process at this event with that particular population, with that particular younger group of people. And I'm going to give Jacob a chance to talk about that a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Brent, and thank you to Climate Generation for allowing us to facilitate a breakout session during that convening. We found a lot of great value in doing that, and again, involving youth was not something that we thought of just during the planning process with Region 9. During this breakout session, we discussed in a lot of detail the different feelings that people had in the room about climate change and different ways of adapting and mitigating to some of the effects of climate change. And participants commented that climate change can and will affect many different parts of their personal life, as well as different areas such as water quality, crop and food growth, animals and their habitats, just to name a very few things that was said during our convening. And then with all these different impacts, there also lies a lot of different opportunities for local government units and everyday people, you and I, to get involved to help mitigate and adapt to some of these climate change impacts. So when asking our breakout session participants how local government units can help with climate change efforts, they stated the need to inform and educate citizens, communicate emergency preparedness more efficiently, and break through politics surrounding climate change. We then went further into the discussion by asking our participants what activities they could do right in their personal lives, right at home, from their work to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. And comments range from very simple and action items that could be accomplished right now in the present to things that maybe require a little more time and effort and energy. So some of the different strategies that were developed with this group were unplugging unused devices, building rain gardens or planting more gardens, purchasing energy efficient appliances, and simply just spreading awareness of climate change happening. But definitely all of the information we gathered from our breakout session was useful, and we're using it currently as we develop the climate change adaptation and vulnerability assessment, and engaging youth populations in creating a personal adaptation strategy are two elements of our plan that we have not considered previous to the Climate Generation convening. So we're very happy about that. If anybody has any questions about Region 9's climate change adaptation plan and vulnerability assessment, you can contact us by visiting our website. Brent and my contact information is provided on that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brent and Jacob. It's great to hear, not only are you developing a climate adaptation process with your community, but you're also thinking about how that can be a replicable model for broader use. And I also love hearing about the surprise learnings of having youth in your solutions workshop at the Mankato convening, and how you've really realized that their perspective is important. This is the issue that we've handed to them. So thank you. Learning about what local communities are doing really renews my faith, and climate change can often feel really daunting and progress is invisible. So it becomes really difficult to grasp our power as individuals. And so hearing about ripple effects like the ones that were shared tonight are really a reminder that we have proof that people are working together and they care about this, and that we're not alone. So thanks so much for sharing. And to build on our awareness of solutions and why they matter, we're going to hear from our special guest, Dr. Jay Austin, on what is at stake. So I'll turn it over to Megan now for that introduction.
Great. Well, I am very excited to introduce Dr. Jay Austin, who is here tonight with us to help us build knowledge and awareness of how climate change is affecting Lake Superior and other Great Lakes. We are happy to have him here this evening because we know that Lake Superior is one of the many things that we as Minnesotans value. And in fact, when we went to Duluth and we asked the community what they valued most, lake was one of the #1 choices that we saw. So To give you a little bit more information about Dr. Jay Austin, he is a professor at the Large Lakes Observatory and the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. He is a physical limnologist, and he is an observationalist who utilizes historical data to study lake processes and to study the sensitivity of lake systems to climate change. He has undergraduate degrees in physics and math from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and he has his PhD from MIT Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution Joint Program in Physical Oceanography. So I will hand it over to Jay now.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Josna, for the introduction and the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm going to switch over to the presentation here. And what I'd like to talk about is some aspects of how lakes are really sensitive, in some sense, to even small changes in climate. And so, as Megan mentioned, I'm part of the Large Lakes Observatory, and I want to just say really quickly a word or two. There we go. The Large Lakes Observatory is a research wing at the University of Minnesota Duluth with a wide range of expertise. We work on lakes around the world. We have a mandate to study large lakes around the world, not just in the upper Midwest. And if there's sort of a common thread that ties all the researchers there across disciplines together, it's a common interest in climate, and not just in modern climate, which is what I do, going out and making modern observations and trying to understand how lakes are responding, but using lakes and the sediments below lakes sort of as tape recorders for understanding past climate. What I'd like to talk about tonight, though, is this idea that lakes can be really sensitive to small changes. And I'm also really interested in seasonal connections, so how behavior in one season influences a lake sort of downstream or in the next season or seasons. And I'd like to talk also about some recent work that I've done with a large group of scientists globally to look at lakes as sort of a climate antenna. So I'm just sort of presenting one view of how one particular system is responding to climate change. So hopefully everyone's familiar with this map here. This is Lake Superior. I'm speaking to you from Duluth, which is at the far western end of the lake. And the story I'd like to tell tonight starts over here in the St. Mary's River. Half the water evaporates from the surface. The water that leaves Lake Superior, half leaves through evaporation. The other leaves to the St. Mary's River over here in Sault Ste. Marie. Before I do that, though, I just want to give you a sense of perspective here. If we took all the water on the planet, ocean water and groundwater and glaciers and icebergs and what have you, and rolled it up into a ball, it would look like the large ball here. Remember that the oceans are very, very shallow shell around the world. If we took fresh water around the world, including glaciers and groundwater and stuff, it would be this ball here. But if we took surface liquid fresh water, lakes and rivers, stuff that we can actually use, we can drink and we can irrigate crops with, it's this tiny dot here. So really understanding something about how these systems work is really important because this is a tremendously precious resource. You could take the three largest lakes in the world by volume, Superior, Baikal, and Tanganyika, and those three alone contain about half of all of the surface liquid fresh water in the world. So these are really very critical resources. At that site that I mentioned earlier in Sault Ste. Marie, they've been measuring water temperature in a power plant once a day since 1906. It's a remarkable resource having a long time series like this. This is the raw data, which is just showing warmth in the summer and cold temperatures in the winter. What I'd like to do is look at that temperature as a function of year, and I'm just looking at summer averages here. This is July through September, so it's an average over the summer season. And what you can see there, and these are, I should point out, these are anomalies. These are differences from the long-term mean. And what you can see is a gentle warming through most of the century, and a real remarkable warming since about the early 80s, including this big step in 1998. This was in Kristen's data in one of the original slides that she showed as well. The interesting thing about this is that if you compare it to the global average air temperature, which is, if you're looking at an article about global warming, this is often the data you're looking at, where you see a change of about a degree or a degree and a half Celsius over the course of a century. The change in Lake Superior is really remarkably large compared to that. And one of the things that my lab is particularly interested in is understanding what causes a lake to be very sensitive to a relatively gentle background change. And so this is some more modern data, and a lot of this data is available in the public domain. These are data from buoys out in the middle of Lake Superior. So in Lake Superior, there are these 3 sites way out in the open water of Lake Superior. And the graphs here represent mean summer temperatures and their trends from 3 sites in Lake Superior, and then another 2 in Michigan, another 2 in Huron. And at every one of those sites, we see remarkable rates of change over the last 35 years, on the order of 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius or 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. And that adds up to a considerable change on the order of 2 to 3 degrees Celsius over the period of record. This data only started getting collected in 1980, which is why these time series start then. If we were to look at data at the surface or temperature from the surface, what we would see is in the spring, we have this very slow warming, which suddenly, when it reaches about, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of the physics here, given the limited amount of time, but the physics of the system dictate that we can sort of define the beginning of the summer season when the lake reaches about 4 degrees Celsius, which is about 39 degrees Fahrenheit. At that stage, it starts forming a warm layer on top, and that warm layer rapidly warms up and achieves maximum temperatures sometime in mid-August. It turns out that the timing of this sort of elbow here, where it reaches 4 degrees Celsius, is critical to what happens the following summer. And in fact, if we look at data, each one of these individual dots represents a different year. We see that the later that onset occurs, so here are years over here where we have a relatively late onset of stratification or onset of that summer season, we have relatively cool water temperatures the following summer. Whereas if we have relatively early onset of that warm layer forming at the surface, we get relatively warm water temperatures, which is not a great surprise because it just has longer to warm up. So it begs the question, what controls the timing of that onset? And if we look at the timing of that onset at all of those same buoys, we can see that at all 7 of the sites that we were considering earlier, the onset of that summer season is getting earlier and earlier, has been getting earlier and earlier over the last 35 years. Well, it turns out that a lot of that is due to the fact that we're seeing less and less ice form on Lake Superior. So this is a bar graph. This is from one of my students, looking at the amount of ice, the fraction of the lake that is covered averaged over a season from December through May in the period 1973 through the present. You can see 2014, which was the amazing polar vortex winter, the extraordinarily cold winter in the upper Midwest. That sort of is bucking the trend here, as you can see. But you can see that prior to 1998, we typically had values in the 20 to 30% range over here. And after that, we have all these values that are sort of in the 5 to 10 or maybe 15%, with a couple of exceptions here and there. Turns out that ice plays a really important role in how the lake receives heat from the atmosphere. And the more ice we have on the lake, the later that overturn occurs. So here we're looking at when that overturn occurs as a function of how much ice is forming on the lake each year. So you can see that when we have lots of ice over here, that overturn or that onset tends to be relatively late, and when we have very little ice, we see relatively early onset of stratification. Remarkably, 2 of the most extreme years, 2014 here and 2012, a very low ice year, are only 2 years apart. So there's a tremendous amount of variability in the system already. And it turns out that you can use that to show that the amount of ice you have controls summer average water temperatures. This is the story that I want to tell, though, and I think this is the take-home message from all of this. And this is pretty straightforward, is that the system seems very sensitive to small changes in climate, whatever climate means. I've been putting this slide into talks for years without ever really defining what I mean by climate. I recently had a student do an analysis of winter air temperatures and how much ice forms the subsequent winter. And so what you see here, each one of these dots again represents a different year. This is the average winter air temperature, average from December through May. And you can see that the colder it is, this is not a great surprise. I'm not suggesting this is really groundbreaking or anything. The colder it is, the more ice we form on the lake. And that's sort of remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable that it's as sharp of a relationship as it is. Once you get up to these higher air temperatures on average, you form very, very little ice. You can see 2014 way out here on one end and 2012 way out here on another. The point I'd like to make, though, and I think this is, again, the take-home message here, is these years here, this cluster here, for instance, these are years with really robust ice on Lake Superior, where we have people are out ice fishing and recreating on the ice. The shipping season is impacted. That's what really defines Lake Superior, those high ice levels. These right here are years with essentially no open lake ice, where there's no ice outside of Duluth. There might be ice in fringing bays and stuff like that in Chequamegon or Whitefish Bay, but there's basically no ice. The difference between one of these years and one of these high ice years and one of these low ice years can be due to a temperature difference of as little as 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. So one of the problems we have when we try to communicate climate change is that the differences we talk about, the changes we talk about, often sound very small. It's going to be a degree warmer by the end of the century or something like that. This suggests that this big important system, this huge ecosystem of Lake Superior, is extremely sensitive to very small changes, the sort of changes that we're talking about when we talk about climate change. Just a couple degrees Celsius are going to lead us from more and more years like this to more and more years out here where we essentially see no ice. If you look at other Great Lakes, we see the same trends on other ice-forming Great Lakes. And so this is something that my lab right now is spending a lot of effort trying to really understand this extreme sensitivity to small changes in climate. Recent work I've done with a very large group of people, you can see me there in the center on this paper that was published earlier this year, has put together a database of 235 lakes from around the world. And what this is allowing us to do now is instead of talking about one lake at a time, we can actually think about lakes as sort of a climate antenna that allow us to study variability in the spatial distribution of climate change around the globe. What we're doing at this stage is trying to understand mechanisms behind what causes variability. We have some lakes, there are a handful of lakes in the world that actually have shown us a very weak cooling trend over the last 25 years. But most lakes, especially up here in Northern Europe and through the Laurentian Great Lakes and the Shield Lakes of Canada, we see remarkable warming trends in all of those. And so lakes represent a point on the landscape. When we're trying to understand climate change, ocean temperature is a very difficult parameter to use because the oceans are big, complex, and globally distributed bodies of water. Air temperature can be very difficult because there's an enormous amount of variability from day to day in air temperature, and small changes in the landscape. A grove of trees grows or gets cut down or something like that can change air temperature on a local basis, which makes interpretation of those time series very difficult. Lakes are these fixed points on landscapes that are really useful for trying to better understand that climate signal. So really quickly, just to conclude, and I'm just about out of time here, what we see, what my lab studies, are these strong seasonal connectivities between seasons in these large ice-covered systems like Lake Superior and other Great Lakes. And it's remarkable that, first of all, we can determine summer conditions very early, but more to the point is that ice and that decline in ice does play a very significant role in understanding temperatures on the lake, and that the system seems to be very, very sensitive to very small changes. And so we're working on understanding that sensitivity. And finally, it's not just Lake Superior, it's not just the Great Lakes. This large group of scientists that I work with has shown that when compared on sort of an equal basis, we do seem to observe this this warming globally, and that I think lakes are a useful feature of our landscape for better understanding the physics of the climate question. So with that, you can see a handful of groups that have supported our research over several years, and I'm out of time, so I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Jay. Actually, for the sake of time, we won't be able to take any questions, but if you all would like to learn more about this topic, you can find a link to the Large Lakes Observatory through the webinars tab on climateminnesota.org. And we're going to wrap up our evening with a bit of storytelling. And our scheduled storytellers were not able to join us tonight, but we don't want you to worry. We're not going to leave you hanging. We want to end our time here with you with a story. Unfortunately, we have a fantastic in-house story to share. I'm happy to introduce our program's coordinator, Megan, who you met earlier. Megan traveled Minnesota with us to all 12 convenings, and she'll share her story titled Minnesota Memories. And you can access our collection to hear more stories and to submit your own at climateminnesota.org.
Great. Thank you, Josna, and thank you, everybody, for sharing all the great work that you're doing around the state of Minnesota. So I would just like to share a bit about my climate story. Growing up in Minnesota with a very close family brought many adventures to my life, especially because with my dad's job, we moved around a lot. So this meant that I got to see most of Minnesota growing up, and it gave me an appreciation for the different biomes. I have had the opportunity to live in the 3 major biomes in Minnesota. I was born in the South Deciduous Forest. I lived there as a young child, then moved northward to the prairie grassland deciduous forest as a high school and college student. And then I called the coniferous forest of the North Shore my home the years after that. So suffice it to say, I am a proud Minnesotan, and being a part of the Climate Minnesota project this past year has brought back many of those childhood memories. As we loaded up the van and drove to the 12 communities, it would occur to me that I knew the local restaurants, parks, schools, and streets of most of these towns because at one point they were home to me. The memory that hit me most when visiting Mankato was actually the Halloween snowstorm blizzard of 1991. When I was 4 years old and I was dressed as a princess and I was tromping through the snow on Rita Road with my candy bucket in hand, and it felt like the snow was up to my neck. But having actually Paul Huttner as our climate speaker at the Mankato convening really felt full circle because he was the sole anchor on WCCO covering the blizzard that year in 1991, and we had just been back to Mankato for the convening. What I recalled visiting Rochester for one of our stops was memories of going to Silver Lake Park on hot summer days and running around the playground equipment that was interconnected and making my own obstacle course, and working up a early adolescent sweat while doing it. And actually this time around visiting Rochester, we did something a little bit more adult, and we enjoyed some delicious food at a restaurant in downtown. But heading to Duluth last spring really felt like I was going home. This is a place where my parents live now, and in more recent memories has surfaced with that trip. It was the June 2012 flood that happened in Duluth that was brought to memory when we went there for the Climate Minnesota convening. After the heavy rains of the night before the flood, I woke up in the morning to a city in the state of an emergency from experiencing a 1 in 1,000-year flood. The road in front of our house looked like a river, and then the clay of Duluth is very orange, and that turned all the rivers and to an orange color, which then flowed into Lake Superior. Let me see here. So what I took away from going to the convening in Duluth after having the memory of this Lake Superior, oh, Kristen, there we go. There's a photo of me in Duluth. That was one of the roads that was basically 6 foot sunken down into the ground there from the water that was taken out underneath it. But what I took away from our convening in Duluth, and something I assume to be true going in, and what Jay touched on, is that water is very important to the people living in Duluth. And living on a Great Lake really allows you to understand the impacts of a changing climate and seeing it firsthand. So much of the pride that I feel as a Minnesotan is because of our 4 seasons and the 10,000 lakes and the many other things that I claim as a part of my identity as a Minnesotan. So as I look back on the memories I have from my childhood in Minnesota, and then also thinking about the memories of this past year that I was able to go to these communities, I see that they are connected. So climate is measured in 10 to 30 year time periods, and I myself am almost 30 years old, and so I really see this as mimicking my life. I see my experience of growing up in Minnesota as a measurement of Minnesota's changing climate. And hearing the stories from folks currently living in these communities, I know that this is true. So these are the places close to my heart, and it's really my motivation to live a life that protects them.
Well, thanks so much. Yep, we're glad that everyone could join us this evening, and we hope that you'll stay connected with us at climategen.org. And a recording of tonight's webinar will be available online, so please share that recap with your networks who missed it. And we hope that you'll also consider joining us for a second webinar, which will feature a completely different cast on April 14th from 10 to 11 a.m. Thanks, everyone. Good night.